All right,
Okay.
recording in progress.
So for me, so let's see here. I just want to see if a slate helps at all. In five, four.
Yeah, dude, my brain just went completely inactive.
No
I'm
worries.
like, I'm like, am I? Because we have the audio lead in that's already recorded,
Yeah.
so
So just go
I
down the
can just
template.
start.
We're just going right
So
down the
so I,
template. Yep.
yeah, okay, so I can just start say, so I'll ask you what's lame, and then from there, okay,
Okay.
okay, so yeah, all right, Scott, tell me what's lame in the church this week.
Oh, first of all, let's go back. Let's do the hi, I'm Mark. Hi, I'm Scott.
Okay,
Okay. So five, four, three.
hi, I'm Mark.
Hi, I'm Scott, and this is Church's Lame, the podcast where we fix the church by revealing where it's broken.
So tell me, Scott, what's lame in the church this week?
So the story that I found this week from the Christian Post is really the kind of story that inspired us to start this podcast to begin with. Here's the headline: Pastor whose church paid him nearly $390,000 in a single year apologizes for not paying taxes and fraud. So if you go on to read the story, it's not that he didn't pay taxes for the year that he was employed as a pastor, that one single year. It's for several years he was not paying taxes and either not filing his tax returns or filing fraudulent tax returns, right? And so for me, like one of the things you're going to hear me coming back to over and over again is what rule did this break, right? And so first and foremost, people in ministry or just people in general, but especially people in church leadership are supposed to be people of light and not darkness, people of truth and not lies, right?
Yeah.
So that's the thing that is kind of like an ice pick to my soul is that like it was so blatant.
Yeah, and it's the fact that it was happening over several years, um, and just different things. I mean, at least he was diverse in his sin, right? uh,
Let it not be said.
Martin Luther, right? He's like sin boldly, and this guy did. He found a
Yeah.
few different ways of doing it. Like the fraud with the PPP loan, the employee retention tax credit thing.
Yeah.
I can't. I used to work. I was working in payroll, and I can't remember what the heck that stands for now.
Yeah.
I feel so stupid.
Uh, the funny part, so like it's been a tough week for me and my family. Like really, it's been tough. Like I could think of a lot of words. It's been an embarrassing week, right? It's been a dishonorable week. It's been a crazy week, but like tough. What's tough about hiding your money from the government and not paying the same thing that everybody else pays in order for us to have a working society?
Yeah, there's that phrase. I can't remember who said it. I don't even want to hazard a guess. But it's like character is who we are when we're alone and the lights are out, or something along those lines.
Yeah,
And here's a guy, and I'm not saying this guy was a complete sack or anything, right? But he's a person who was put in a situation where he didn't have nearly the oversight that he should have had. Was thrust into a situation that, at least from my understanding of the article, right, like this was kind of all very new to him,
yeah,
and it just tore him down.
yeah. And that brings up another great point is like, where's the freaking accountability? Where are the
Yeah,
people in the church? Like, I think in a lot of churches, you would call them like an elder board or deacon board, you know, but in today's modern hip church, you know, you might have another name for that, right? But like there's supposed to be this circle of leadership of people who are well trusted, who've shown over and over again that they meet a certain agreed upon standard by the body of being wise and being thorough in their vetting, that when they choose somebody to lead the church, that it's not somebody that that has a history of being so incredibly awful at hiding their money making fraudulent habits.
Well, I mean, you don't want to have somebody who's good at hiding
Right.
their
Yeah, I guess.
honest.
Yeah, I guess you got that.
Oh, but having been a church elder and had to deal with a situation in which a pastor, had done some bad stuff, not that it was anything done maliciously, it was just things done really stupidly because there wasn't enough oversight. There was a lot of expectation on the pastor to take care of all these things,
Yeah.
and he got kind of sucked into this mindset that he couldn't display the weakness to ask for help.
Right.
And I am sure that there was a large degree to which ego also was playing into this whole situation. So, there's some issue of the pastor wasn't receiving the care that he needed or the oversight to make sure that, the types of decisions he was making were understood. And when reading this article, I couldn't help but think back on that time. Like, what was the church's structure
Yeah.
that he was able to do these things? Like, you shouldn't, as a pastor, be able to, like, just unilaterally, falsify things for the PPP loan.
Right.
You know, that should have, like, you should have had a finance director of some kind, or
Yeah.
something.
Yep. And you bring up another interesting idea there, and we once again we're going to bring this up a lot over the course of this podcast. We live in the age of information, and the blade cuts both ways. It's an awesome resource, right? If to find your favorite meme and to get information and to get a lot of knowledge into your head fast. But the other side of that coin is it also puts a lot of imagery into our head immediately of what the quote unquote successful pastor should look like, right? Because
Oh,
all you have
yeah.
to do is jump on YouTube and see insert your favorite pastor's name here. Right now, if you look at the trending things for religion in YouTube, Elevation Church, Stephen Furtick, he is far
Mm,
and away the most searched pastor on YouTube currently. So all you've got to do is like just look at what's trending, and if you're a pastor, you are going to be forced to look at videos from Elevation and by Stephen Furtick, and that is going to like seep into your brain. This is what I need to present to my congregation, and there's nothing
right.
authentic or even interesting, right? It's like it's just carbon copy imitation of somebody else's church when churches are supposed to be um, authentic and real and present with the people around you, not the people out in the internet world.
Right. And, it's hard for me not to have already pictured Stephen Furtick before you brought him up because, he's one of those guys, and I'm not blaming him for this, but it's
Right.
like,
Yeah.
you have this image of what the successful pastor is, right?
Yeah.
And you have pressure in a pastoral call to be every bit as successful as the next guy. And then you're seeing all this stuff through an extremely highly curated um, lens. It's like the image that these famous pastors are putting up online
Yeah.
are heavily curated to look, that to make them look well thoughtful and put together, well thoughtful. See, if I were curated, I wouldn't have said that.
Well,
Oh
we'll just
my.
have to make that part of our lexicon. Well, thoughtful. Yeah. So,
Yeah, and the beauty of not editing is you can hear how dumb we really are. Yeah.
gag reel. Yes. Yes.
Authenticity.
Yes. But like, so all that to say, where are the church leaders? Right? So much went wrong in this situation that was easily avoidable if the church leaders wouldn't have been mesmerized by things that matter less, right? Like I imagine when in this situation, they in their mind had a list of what they thought they needed from a pastor, right? And
Hmm.
so whatever it was they got from him, whether he's charming or whether he's well read or whether he's uh, exciting, right? He brings energy to the pulpit. Whatever it is they thought they needed, they found in him, but they didn't do the due diligence of making sure that he was like in the army. We called it the total package. The total
Yeah.
package in the army is the guy who is super physically fit, could ace his physical fitness test, was an expert soldier, like so could do the basic things a soldier does: shoot a
Hmm.
rifle, hiding, camouflage, the basic soldier skills, and was awesome at whatever their military specialty was. And if you mastered those three things, you were the total package. And in this situation, it's not this guy. Like humans are humans, and we all fall short. But there was a lack of leadership in defining what is the total package, and then there was a lack of leadership in discipling this guy to bring him to elevate him from wherever he's at into being the total package.
Right, and that kind of goes back to the concept of if you want to be a leader, you must be a servant, which
Yeah.
is a thing that seems to get forgotten about. You know, especially in American versions of Christianity, it seems.
Yes.
Where we have that individualistic culture. It's like you need to be a starter, and pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, even though
Yeah.
the originator phrase was no man ever pulled himself up by his own bootstraps.
Right.
But this is a situation I think where the problem is this is the solution. It's like there was no leadership. Solution: leadership and accountability. I mean, it's pretty easy, and even small churches can do this.
Yep.
But I mean, it might take some coaxing to get people to want to participate. But
Yeah. Ultimately, like in this situation, ultimately for this particular church, I think it's relatively easy to rise from the ashes, Like
yeah.
this is not a this is kind of a bummer and it's a little embarrassing, but it's relatively easy now to learn the lessons and apply it to the hiring of the next pastor on down the line, you
Oh, for
know.
sure.
And at the same time, while this situation does make everybody else kind of go, those crazy Christians, they're at it again, hiding money. This is why you can't trust the church. They're hiding money. While that's happening, it's very easy, even for that community, to kind of go, well, that's kind of that church, and that probably doesn't apply to every church around the country doing good things and actually, you know, doing the things that Jesus commanded us to do.
Yeah, and I'd recently come across I forget if it was Barna or Pew, uh, but they had kind of researched and kind of found how often fraud is reported
Mm,
in uh, religious nonprofits versus other organizations,
right.
and found that the rate of reporting of fraud was 66% for just the regular pagan businesses of the world, but it was um, or the non-reporting of fraud, sorry, was 66%. The non-reporting of fraud in churches was like 95
Yeah. Wow.
because of various factors. People don't want to they don't want to potentially put their pastors in jail.
Right.
I didn't know how to say that with less plosives, but I'll try next time. Um, and I understand the reflex not to want to jail a fellow believer.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, a lot of these things, you can handle it differently. If you do not think the person warrants jail time, you don't have to allow charges to be pressed. You can
Right.
handle it differently,
Yeah.
but we need to stop seeing the best in other people
Mm-hmm.
when we are put in certain positions, right? So I do a lot of accounting and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
I am, as a matter of my job, to not completely trust anybody.
Right.
And it's not that I think these people are garbage. It is that you pay me money to make sure other people don't take your money.
Right.
So I have to treat everybody with a certain amount of just kind of mistrust off the bat. And I think that's where, having good systems in a church and good structures of leadership are going to fix some of this, as well as, good hiring practices, like you said.
Yeah. And this is where we would use the word. I think this is where we should use the word stewardship.
Yeah.
Where I think from the pulpit, the word stewardship usually gets applied to the person sitting in the pew saying, if you were a good steward, you would open up your wallet and put more money in the offering basket. And I think if we're going to be kind of real with one another, I'm absolutely not afraid to kind of turn that camera around to the leaders of the church and say, well, if you were a good steward, you wouldn't be hiring people who are trying to steal money from the rest of the country, because that's essentially what they do. When you're not paying taxes, you're basically stealing, keeping your resources from the rest of the country,
Right.
you know? So stop it. Stop stealing.
Yes.
Stop enabling the people who steal. Stop it.
Stop it. Yes.
Okay. So I think that wraps that one up with a bow really nicely. Your article, just to give it a little introduction before I give it to you, your article was really breathtaking, to say the least. It was breathtaking how um, I don't even know what to say except to say everybody just needs to strap in.
Uh, and as I was reading this thing, man, I felt the wind hitting my face. So what I have wasn't, I mean, it wasn't an article as much as it was just a reprinting of part of a chapter of a book that had come out recently. And Charisma Magazine had printed this with permission of the author. And it comes from this book called The Silencing of the Lambs from a guy, Dr. Michael Brown. And I guess his doctorate is in Middle Eastern languages. So he has, he wasn't from some degree mill, I guess. Uh, but of course, The Silencing of the Lambs should kind of already be a trigger for
Mm,
anybody looking at this. It's like that, we're referencing a movie about a serial killer here, and the book, it's something about cancel culture, but really what it is, it's you know they're trying to cancel Christianity is kind of the thesis of the whole book. And oh my gosh, so this thing, this is chapter 10. I don't know where chapter 1 started. I'm afraid to know. But this thing
yeah.
went off the rails real fast.
Yep.
And I was white knuckling my whole way through this. Pardon me. So in this chapter, he is actually quoting somebody else entirely, talking about a situation in Victoria, Australia, where uh, people were trying to get conversion therapy banned.
Right.
And, that's a sore spot for a lot of Christians who think that, conversion therapy is a good thing and that it works. But that's not something that the medical establishment agrees with.
Right.
And so, a lot of people are trying to get it banned for the reasons, that it doesn't work and believing that it can be harmful.
Right.
But this guy, Bill Muhlenberg, I guess was the original author. Um, so he's talking about this in Victoria, Australia, and then says that since Christians are often the ones at the forefront of performing conversion therapy, that this is therefore a direct assault on biblical Christianity, which I should point out never says we need to do conversion therapy, but then moves on to assume that the people who banned conversion therapy must automatically think the Bible is hate speech, then decides to call them God haters because he's defining who these people are, not actually letting them, prove who they are. Uh, and then says that they are going to come after us to take our Bibles away.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and then concludes that because of all these things that are going to automatically happen at some point in the future, regardless of what reality actually says, Christianity, scripture, and prayer are all now being criminalized, Victoria. We go from conversion therapy to just the outright criminalization of Christianity in 4 or 5 paragraphs.
Yeah. I would like to read some excerpts from this just to illustrate how nutty banana it is. But before I do, I hope anybody watching this podcast knows that our heart, like behind all this, is very much a heart of knowledge is power, and educating yourself is power, and knowing more is better than knowing less, and knowing what's true and right is better than knowing what's false and incorrect, right?
Yeah.
And so I hope everybody, we'll have a link in the show notes. I hope everybody actually reads this article, because if you do, you are going to find parallel after parallel after parallel of the word style of this article and the word styles of neo-Nazi kind of thinking, like not word for word, but kind of concept for concept, right? So for instance, really early in this article, after seeing footage I have of one of the lawyers for this LGBT movement say their real mission is eventually to fight religion, everyone on this list needs to know that professional therapists are not really the LGBT activist target. Their target is Christianity and any religion that says LGBT lifestyles are sinful and unhealthy. They're coming for our churches. Okay, first of all, so I've got two things just on this one sentence, 2 sentences. I've got 2 things. One, after seeing footage I have of one of the lawyers, so he's seen footage of one lawyer. So then isn't it fair for me then to look at this article and make generalizations about all Christians based off of just this one article and say, well, hey, all Christians are hyperbolic and they're desensitized to being compassionate to the LGBTQ community, and they're just kind of scary and hateful. Can I make that judgment? So stop doing that. Stop making generalizations. That's bad, very bad. But then they're coming for our churches. They're coming for our guns. Nobody's coming for your gun. Nobody's coming for your church. We live in Chicago, right? We live near Chicago. Even though Illinois is mostly rural and there's a lot of red, Chicago itself is a pretty liberal city, like most cities. Liberal city. Nobody's coming for anybody's guns. Okay? Nobody's trying to take away anybody's anything. And if you throw a rock in any direction in Chicago, you will hit a cathedral that you would need wrecking balls to tear down. That's how many churches there are in this liberal city. They are everywhere. Nobody is coming for your flipping church.
And that's it's angering, it's saddening, it's confounding, because there's this, what's this guy complaining about here? He's complaining about they're coming for our churches, so he's complaining about persecution.
Mm-hmm.
And first of all, there is no persecution if you are not having people refuse to sell you toothpaste because you're a Christian. if people aren't just jailing you randomly because you're Christian, if people aren't threatening to murder your family because you're Christian, you know, I mean, persecution doesn't always have to be super violent, but it needs to actually be demonstrable. Again, the Bible doesn't command us to perform conversion therapy. So if we're not commanded to do that, then you can't say that this is an affront on biblical Christianity of any kind. It's not, they're not trying to make Christians do things that they're commanded not to do or vice versa.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that this guy has to like anything about the LGBT community,
Right.
but
Exactly.
there's more than one approach to doing what you think your calling to do is. And you need to be listening to people who've actually gone through conversion therapy, not just 6 months afterward, because that's one of the big problems with conversion therapy is that when you drill down into the people that say that it works, you find that there is no long-term following of a cohort. It's like people come
Right.
through the program and then they disappear. So 10 years later, we don't know. What do we know? We know that two of the dudes that founded Exodus International, which
Right.
was responsible for doing tons of conversion therapy, gave up on it, left it. They're still believers as far as I know, but they are openly gay and in devoted relationships, not with each other, I don't think. I think it's they have each their own relationship.
Yeah.
There's more to the issue that you need to analyze because just because you think you're doing the right thing does not mean you're doing the right thing.
Right. Yeah. That's good.
And you can do the right thing in the wrong way and cause harm by doing it, which means it's no longer the right thing, right? It's
Right.
the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Right. And this seems to be, well, this is a theme that runs all throughout time and the human existence. But certainly in the last 5 years, there's there's been this focusing of an idea that just because you know a little bit about something and you've done a couple hours of research on Google, or you've had Exodus International come to your church and speak for a couple weekends,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
does not make you an expert on psychology, on psychotherapy, on sexuality, on gender, right? It doesn't make you an expert or me an expert on any of those things. But here's the thing is I'm not an expert and you're not an expert. So what we do then is we kind of go, well, nobody's an expert. And that's not true. There are
Oh,
people
yeah.
who go to undergrad school, who go to grad school, who spend 60 hours a week in the trenches working to understand this in depth and in nuance that you and I will never ever experience. And that is not them flexing or them doing or them trying to cancel you. That is them legitimately knowing more than you and I. So you and I might benefit from shutting the F up.
Yeah, this happens a lot and it's all over the place and it's a fact that within the modern church, specifically the evangelical church, you have this tendency to distrust the academy. There was one day I saw it's a clip of a YouTube video where a guy was acting in complete disbelief at something that this economist had said because the economist is a Marxist, and it's like, well, just because the economist is a socialist doesn't make him not an economist who has gone through all the education and training, which you, as your little YouTube self, haven't done. You're just a
Influencer.
YouTuber. It's like even if unless you as a YouTuber have actually achieved your doctorate in economics, you cannot criticize the guy, dismissing him because you just disagree with him as a matter of political philosophy.
Right. Exactly.
And it seems like, and oh, this makes me so mad, right? Because I have you know, I have a lot of family who are all highly educated, right? So,
Right.
this mistrust of the academy is very frustrating.
Yeah.
And there's um, this kind of Christian egoism, right?
Hmm.
That says that, we are at the center of creation. We are the church, the center of creation, and you could say, well, hey, we have God's favor because we accepted Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior. That might be true, but the atheist that lives three houses down from you doesn't know you exist and doesn't care.
Right.
Um,
Do I know
the
you?
like the modern church, like you and your, con, you know, persecution complex, right?
Yeah.
Most of the world doesn't care about you because your version of Christianity is not a threat to anything they're doing. You are a minority in the country. You might think you're a majority, but you're not. You're a
Right.
minority because you're not actually accomplishing anything. And and just because you're loud doesn't mean that anybody should pay attention to you.
Right.
And so like this whole thought that this the world is coming after you is like no, and that's and if you want to call it satanic, that's the most satanic thing is that the world is apathetic toward the church.
Right. Like, have you ever read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Science fiction
Oh
comedy, Douglas
yes.
Adams, right? The Earth gets labeled as mostly harmless. And that's the church. That's the American church right now. Mostly harmless.
Oh, for sure.
You know.
If even mostly.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
So
it's
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
oh no
But
no
I
no.
did want to move on though. So religious rights and the truth are being taken away as we speak, and it's going to get worse, whether we speak more candidly about it or not. Sooner or later, Christians will have to make a decision to speak out or sacrifice. Speak out or act out. To me, this sentence reads very much as if we are calling out to the lone wolves. And anybody
Mm.
who knows that phrase uh, knows that calling out uh, to speak out and sacrifice, right? So he is calling people to do something that requires the ultimate, um, uh, the full measure of a person's devotion, is the way it might have been put in a more honorable
Yeah.
time, right? But
Yeah,
we are
yeah.
basically speaking to I feel like we're speaking to the same people who sat on the Capitol lawn with a noose ready for the vice president. Like, this may look dodgy, and but the history will judge you as the true hero for wanting to take back our country and take back our religion, as if there was anybody to take it back from.
Yeah, and that use of language, somebody needs to do something, or else, the world is going to end around you. Yeah, if you want to spur the most rebel elements of any belief system, that's kind of the way to do it.
Yeah.
And I think the worst part of it for me is the fact it's like, did you read your Bible before you thought about any of these things?
Yeah.
Because we're basically promised, and by basically I mean it is the text, not the subtext. We are promised they are not going to like us. It's like
Right.
Jesus says, if if you think it's interesting that they hate you, they hated me first. They're going to hate you.
Yeah.
Like if you're doing Christianity right, nobody should hate us except by the fact that we're living in a way that's so good that it makes them angry.
Right.
It's like it should make them angry that, our churches, we don't have anybody who's dying of malnutrition in our churches because we take care of one another.
Yeah.
It should make them angry that Christians don't let other Christians ever become homeless.
Right.
Of course, that's not the church as it actually is, unfortunately.
Right.
You
The
know.
other thing I love about this paragraph is that he's talking about religious rights are being taken away. And so his solution to that is, and I guess the religious right he's talking about is the right to religious assembly, I guess. But his solution to that is to take away people's right to speak freely about their disapproval of the church. How is that better? How does that put us in a better place as the church? I don't get it. It just seems to me to be uh, an idea that,
Insane.
well, not just insane, but like the solution is worse than the problem. You know what I mean? Like, hey, like we
Yeah.
feel like our right to assemble is under attack, so we're going to take away your right to speak. You know?
But it kind of makes a logical sense,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like if your response to being that oppressed is to lash out and oppress the oppressor, for lack of a better way of saying it,
Sure. Yeah.
that's not how Christians are supposed to react.
Right.
But it makes sense from a human standpoint that that would be kind of your lizard brain reaction to that sort of treatment.
Right.
But then, nobody's taking away their right to practice Christianity. Yeah, it's like one can make that argument in China, maybe,
Right.
you know,
North
but
Korea.
not,
Yeah.
yeah, North Korea, not Australia, not the United States, but people will make that claim. And the issue isn't that they're taking away our right to practice Christianity. They're taking away our capacity to impose Christianity on everybody else, whether they want it or not.
Right.
And as a Christian who believes that, that real faith is genuine from the inside and not simply a practice that one does outwardly to maintain an appearance,
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Take the 10 commandments down and from my courthouse.
Yeah.
I don't want them there. I don't want you telling everybody else in the world that they must be Christians or else. Like, it's like you're a horrible human being if you're not a Christian. I've met some horrible Christians. I am one.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
not to put too fine a point on it, but that's the reality. It's like I'd rather my church be 5 people who are all completely genuine than 500 who are all fake.
Exactly. Exactly right. Okay. Since Christians are often the ones at the forefront of offering genuine help and healing in this area, it's like, really? Have you done a search lately for terms like exvangelical, like deconstruction? Have you watched the videos after video after video after video of people giving their testimony, their autobiography of how they were spiritually, mentally, psychologically demolished by
Yeah.
their churches because their churches didn't know how to express their lack of acceptance for their sexuality other than to try to pray the gay away, conversion therapy, punish you, Mars Hill, have exorcisms in basement rooms in private. The sheer number of testimonies to how awful the church has been to this community is on full display for the world to consume.
Right. And I think, a close, association with that, right, would be how the church regularly treats women in the church
Sure.
and just the culture of patriarchy
Mm-hmm.
where, we often treat women as if they're second class citizens, that they don't have agency. Um, go watch a Christian movie, hopefully a quote unquote romantic Christian movie, and you'll see what I mean. You know, if you want to see the most regressive attitudes towards gender, that's the way to do it. I can understand when you're that regressive about gender,
Yeah.
why you react the way you do to a gay man that comes in your church.
Right.
Like, because here's somebody who violates everything that you think makes a man a man.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and you want to call it feminine, but and you can't really call it feminine. He's still a man, right? So it's like it's all those problems.
Yeah. And by the way, like especially since you bring up women, like right now, like I probably no, I think right now one of the most popular movements in the American church is what I would call this new reformed movement. John Piper, Matt Chandler, Mark Driscoll, all these guys that are kind of like in woke
Yeah, you are
fundamentalists, right?
speechless. You're
All the
speechless.
language of fundamentalism, but in this more charming, charismatic, good for all time zones kind of presentation, right? They are absolutely clear that if you're a woman, you will not be in leadership. Like leadership is for men, and women are there to support their man. And
Oh,
like even among this movement, Matt Chandler in particular, he is now the head of what's called the Acts 29 network, which is a church planting network, right? They
yes.
money and resources to plant churches, which somehow survived the whole Mark Driscoll being let go in shame for for the silliness at Mars Hill. But Acts 29 still survives, and part of their vetting process is, well, if you want to plant a church, are you a man? Are you a good man? Are you a spiritual man? Do you have a good wife? You know, it's like so the patriarchy is still alive and well. Like if you think like, man, like we've solved all these issues, why do we have to keep talking about the LGBTQ community? Because we haven't gotten done talking about sexism and racism. Like, of course, we're still talking about being gay in the church.
Yeah, and oh my gosh, like I remember once hearing John MacArthur say that there is no biblical reason that a woman should preach. To which my brain went, except for the part where Paul was just saying, when women are preaching and prophesying, yada, yada, yada. So, it's like these guys just move right past any aspects of gender equality that exist in scripture and ignore it because it gets in the way of what they think it should be.
Yeah,
And when we're talking about, toxic masculinity, that's a phrase that conservatives love to jump on and be like, no, 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 no. They get all angry about it
yeah,
because of toxic masculinity. But like, it's not just toxic, to other people. It's toxic to ourselves,
absolutely.
and that's what this is. It's a kind of, forced, coerced masculinity that they want to encourage. And it's not based on anything in the Bible. It's based on, John Wayne and Ronald Reagan. I mean, like
Yeah,
Ronald Reagan as in his acting days
right,
is what I'm more referring to here. But it's like that's what they think everything is supposed to be. And like nobody under 30 agrees with them.
right. Hold on, hold that thought. I got to make an emergency bathroom break. Hold on.
Do it.
Okay, sorry about that. So let's go ahead and start that whole thought over again, and I'll do the edit.
I don't even know what the thought was now.
Yeah.
My brain purged.
Like the male John Wayne.
Oh
Uh
yeah, so it's like yeah that that image of masculinity it exists in the evangelical church is not a good one. Um, and in fact, thinking of John Wayne, right? There's a book called Jesus and John Wayne, which talks a lot about that kind of um, macho bravado masculine version of Christianity, which is wonderful since they use it to justify, like, well, we want to be like the Bible says we should be. It's like, but we see so many images of God that are feminine.
mhm.
It's not always about strength, it's also about you know nurturing and protection. Like, he'll take you under his wing, and images of like birds that way, right? Like, birds aren't masculine imagery. It's like, so there's a lot of that. We see, Jesus does not ignore his own emotions or the emotions of anybody else.
Right.
It's there's a lot more to being, a Jesus kind of masculine than there is to being what a lot of people think masculine needs to look like.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's like we forget the beatitudes, right? And it's not the strong and the forceful that are going to be blessed. It is not the overpowerer, or once again the person who can pull themselves up by their bootstrap. It's not the person that conquers every obstacle that is in line for the blessing, you know? It's
Right.
actually very rarely that person, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And but for some reason, well, once we we take this theological legacy, right? 2,000 years of this theological legacy, and we throw it in a blender with a couple hundred years of capitalist legacy, and we come up with the Jesus who always wants us to be happy and win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And oh, I can't get angry enough about that. I mean, to
Yeah.
be quite honest, it's like the prosperity gospel. A lot of people will look at the prosperity gospel and shake their finger at it,
Yeah.
as they should. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
it's utter drivel,
Yeah.
but then they don't realize how much that way of thinking has actually deeply penetrated into mainline Christian thinking and mainline just American Christianity, whether it's Catholic or Orthodox or whatever.
Yeah.
You see a lot of this in people of other faiths as well, right? It's like
Mhm.
the American way of thinking has really tainted it,
Right.
um, and a big part of that for me, that I at least that I see, is this it's entitlement mentality.
Mm.
Is like, we have certain inalienable rights, and I'm going to contend that the Bible never says you have a right to anything except to be called children of God. That's the only right we're told we have. Otherwise, we have a whole lot of obligations, uh, especially to one another. But this idea that, like, well, we have a right not to be persecuted is really what this article is, or this article, this book, at least by way of this chapter, seems to be saying.
Right.
Like, I have a right not to be persecuted. Well, first of all, you're not persecuted, and two, you don't have the right not to be persecuted, and three, if you were persecuted, well, let's go see what the Apostle Paul, who wrote about that a bunch,
Yeah.
has to say. He's like, rejoice, don't lose heart, yada, yada, yada. The
Yeah.
message is pretty simple.
Yeah.
Not to mention, like, this whole thing, calling these people God haters. It's like, if these people were burning down your churches, like yeah, like some of the wacko couple of kids in Norway were doing, right? The
Hmm.
black metal kids that had just snapped. Like those guys, we can call them God haters, all right?
Hmm.
You know, but that's not a label we should be throwing around willy nilly when we are told to love our enemy and pray for those who persecute us, right?
Yeah.
Are you
So
praying for these people? Are you loving them by calling them God haters? By insisting that they think that you're nothing but hate speech? Or, I mean,
right. Yeah. So I think there's a couple fundamental ideas. And like once again, back to like what rules are broken. If your life and my life doesn't have any resemblance to the life of Jesus, we've lost the plot, right?
yeah.
And Jesus was a man who was persecuted. He was not persecuted by the government. He was not persecuted by atheists. He was not persecuted by homosexuals. He was persecuted by his own religious legacy. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Yeah.
It wasn't the political powers that called for his arrest and for his punishment. It wasn't it wasn't the woke culture of the time that called for his arrest and punishment. You know, it was the religious leadership of the time that saw him as not only as a blasphemer but as a threat, and they're the ones who insisted on his punishment, and they're the ones who had to be um, mollified
Yeah.
in order to keep them from getting out of control.
Yeah. When you
You
have
know,
Pontius Pilate looking at Jesus and saying, why am I having to bother with you, kid?
what are you doing here? What am I looking at? What's the deal? Yeah,
Like,
and then the other thing,
seriously.
yeah, and then the other thing is now one of my favorite lines from The West Wing is we learn what our fathers teach us, right? So if we look at the American church here in 2022, oh my God, 2022, it's 2022. If we look at the
It
American
hurts. It
church
hurts so bad.
and we see church after church, uh, prosperity gospel, um, even if it's not prosperity gospel, it's still like the church of you're awesome, and I want you to know how awesome you are. And by making you happy about how awesome you are, you're gonna do whatever. You're gonna do whatever to help us in whatever our agenda is. And our agenda is usually growth, right? So
Yeah.
either we'll get you to put some money in an offering, or like, oh, you have an ability. You're a musician. We're gonna throw you up on stage to get more people in the pews to put more money in the basket. You know, oh, you're really good with kids. We're gonna go put you in the kids ministry so the parents can sit in the pew and put money in the basket so I can put more in my bank account tax free. You know what I mean? And so we didn't just happen upon this. This is generation after generation of our fathers teaching us that this is holiness.
Yeah. And the outward appearance of holiness is something that's deeply important to a lot of Christians.
Yeah.
Because if they can see something that appears to be unholy, then they're bothered by it. But there's a lot of exceptions to that rule, to be quite honest. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to jump on that soapbox right now.
Yeah.
But the fact remains that, there are blind spots that people have,
Mm-hmm.
um, especially when it comes um, to those in power.
Yeah.
A lot of Christianity, or I should say Christianity, a lot of Christians will say that, we should give deference to those who are in power. Um, and then they'll say we should speak truth to power. But
Mm-hmm.
really, it only means if the people in power do something to tread past a line that we have established as a litmus test for belonging.
Right.
And so that, something like the whole conversion therapy ban in Victoria, right? So that is a situation in which somebody crossed a litmus test for the church, and then these particular people who are quite frankly, these are fundamentalists. These aren't even evangelicals. These are fundamentalists.
Right.
And from a couple other things I've seen on Charisma magazine, um, oh holy hell, there's a problem there.
Yeah. Yep.
Um, and that's what happened here. Otherwise, it's like, oh well, if the president thinks we should invade a country that hasn't attacked us, hey, that's just fine. We're going to remain silent on it. But these queers, they better check themselves. It's like, I'm sorry, but killing people versus not doing conversion therapy, because let's face it, not a single military engagement or police action or whatever the hell you want to call it have we engaged in where civilians didn't die.
Right.
Non-combatant civilians die constantly. What was, conservatives love to call Obama out because of all the drone strikes and
Yeah.
all the civilians that were killed.
Right.
But where was that when, Daddy Bush or Sonny Bush or were doing it? Or where like, why didn't liberals line up and say, hey, Mr. Clinton, Mr. Obama, what the hell are you doing?
Right.
Because life is more important than whatever the hell you are sending our children out to war for.
Right.
When we're told, blessed are the peacemakers, right? You said we forgot the Beatitudes. That seems to be one we forget. Blessed are
Yeah.
the peacemakers.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more important matters to be speaking truth to power
Sure. Yep.
than this. But the church actually needs to do that and not just say, oh, here's a couple of things that we are really against, and that's what we're going to fight.
Right.
You have a huge swath of American evangelicals who only vote the way they do because of abortion.
Right.
Like that single issue voting is a huge thing.
Right.
Christians aren't supposed to be single issue people.
Right. But that, like, this is a whole nother hour. Like, just talking about
Yeah,
how
yeah.
the church has gotten co-opted by politics, like, is a whole study in weak-mindedness. To put it bluntly, to put it really bluntly, this is how weak-minded the church can be, that it doesn't even understand how it's being manipulated.
Right. And to bring my point full circle, is that the issue here with this persecution complex is really because the church is losing its dominance culturally. And because the power structures are not supporting the church as much as it used to, people are getting upset.
Sure.
Constantine no longer likes us, I guess, is really what it comes down to. And then they're getting upset.
Yeah.
And then they're calling it persecution.
Right.
So you're playing the victim, like you wanted to draw the equivalent between, certain, white supremacist groups and certain, of the more edgy, fringy Christian groups, right? It's you play the victim and then you can call people to your cause.
Right. Right. So clearly, the Bible itself is seen as a book filled with hate speech, according to these militant misotheists. Am I saying that right?
Misotheists, yeah.
Surely Bibles and Christian literature will be among the documents seized by the authorities. And once again, we have this this wonderful moment of hypocrisy, because who is it right now that's taking the books out of our school library? It's the fundamentalists. Once again,
Yes.
like these books that have been part of our legacy of education, of culture, of the fabric that is plurality in America, which, I mean, there's a part of me that still believes that, even if, like, I don't necessarily think of America as great, but I think there's something different and set apart about America. And it is that what used to be a commitment to plurality, that we are all on this bus together, and that makes us stronger. And that gives us strength and flexibility all in one, in a way that we can never have in any of the more is the word homogenous or homogeneous cultures around the world. Where like just Asians are like Koreans are Koreans, and they're very, there's not that same um, melting pot kind of in most of the world. There's not that same kind of melting pot experience.
Yeah, like there definitely seems to be something unique to, and I'm not going to say unique to America, but unique to the Americas.
Mm,
Because when you go, south of the equator, you still see a lot of mixing as well. Brazil has a very diverse nation. Argentina has a disproportionate number of Germans in it. Not going to say why,
right.
but it's there's that thing, but there's a promise to that, right? And you would think that that the people in the church would say like, hey, look, things are changing, but hey, this is actually kind of a cool deal because look at all these new people we get to evangelize.
Yeah.
And instead, it kind of often turns to look at all these people we can hate.
Right. Right. And like it's funny because we think we've come so far, um, but like we're in the throes of banning books. We still go on witch hunts, but now we're not looking for people doing magic. Now we call them homosexuals, and now we call them scientists, right? But those are the witches we hunt after now. Not a whole lot has changed, except that we've got well trimmed beards and goatees, and we wear cool vests and leather shoes.
Don't forget the cardigans.
The cardigans. Don't forget the
The
cardigans.
cardigans.
And what the what do you call the see, now I'm not looking cool. Not the corduroys.
Oh,
Corduroys, yeah. You know what I mean? But to me, like this here, in this particular sentence, in this particular paragraph, when we got to the like the false church, the false thing of like they're taking away our Bibles, when it's really the Bible believers that are taking away our other books, that like it's the Klan. Like the church is essentially part of the fundamentalist part of the church is essentially reverting back to being the Klan.
that's super harsh, but probably deserved.
But it's like it's slow. So like this is a super slow process. But like I feel like if you play it out and if it goes unchecked, like that's the other part of it. If it goes unchecked and the pendulum doesn't swing back to um a a a more compassionate sensibility, it seems like that's where the church is going.
Yeah, and I would like to think that that's not true, but every indication that I've seen is that the fundamentalist movement it just got absorbed into the evangelical movement,
Yeah,
right? It didn't die; it just got sucked up, and
right.
it's been kind of spreading out through evangelicalism. And then even because I mean we go to covenant churches, which is kind of rides this middle ground between the mainline and the evangelical churches.
Mm-hmm.
But we see some, churches that are highly evangelical, if not into this fundamentalist camp.
Yeah,
And it upsets me when I hear a covenanter actually talk about us being persecuted. Not like us as in, oh, believers in Saudi Arabia or believers in North Korea or believers in China.
right,
Us, believers in Illinois
right,
or Tennessee, where trust me, nobody is persecuting Christians in Tennessee.
right. It's just like so it's mind-boggling to me. Like if you are a racist follower, there's a home for you in the church. If you're a sexist Jesus follower, there's a home for you in the church. Um, if you're a homophobic Jesus follower, there's a home for you in the church. But if you love somebody differently, other than a monogamous heterosexual relationship, there is no home for you in the church, even though thousands upon thousands in the LGBTQ community are looking for exactly that, a home in the Christian church. And there's no room for them anywhere.
No, and that's the really sad part to me is just how many. how many people out there are desperate, desperate, desperate to have somebody preach the gospel to them? And I'm not saying this from some sort of like generic evangelist standpoint. I mean, active, believing in Jesus, LGBT folk need somebody to come to their house and help them lead a Bible study, who need to give them a place to worship, even if it's just like worshiping in a home church. These are people who are desperate for it and they can't get it. And the answer for so many is we don't want these people in our church in the first place. It's like, regardless of whether or not you think they should be, gay or whatever, I don't even care. These people want Jesus. What are you doing to give them Jesus?
Right. And so what happens is women who desire to be leaders start their own churches. People of color who desire to be part of the conversation start their own churches. The LGBTQ community are now starting their own churches. And traditional Christian thinking guarantees its own irrelevance over time. And the church, as it used to exist, as it currently exists, practically guarantees its own downfall.
Yeah, it's hard for me to disagree with that.
You know, so and like I don't want to end on that note because that's but
No,
I
it's
think
a
that's an
sad
important
note.
I think that's an important thing to talk about. um Honestly, it's like the church is a living thing and living things can die, so you got to feed it, you have to work it. Like you and I both, we are both in a season of thinking about health and fitness for ourselves. I am on the precipice of 50 years old and everything hurts. My knees hurt, my legs hurt, walking the stairs, up and down the stairs hurts.
Whatever
And
do you mean? I don't understand this at all.
I don't know what you're talking about, right? And so like Tom
Nothing.
Hanks said it best, like there is no big mystery to this. You have to eat less and you have to move more, right? And so and to me that's the perfect analogy to the church. Like you need to what's the movie, Russell Crowe, A Diet of the Mind, right? You need this carefully curated diet of the mind and you need to work it out, and it needs to be strengthened. So there needs to we need to have a reckoning, and not a reckoning that's like a punishment reckoning, but a reckoning of truth, right? And the truth is that being being simple, America, bootstraps, apple pie, stars and stripes, Union Jack, that feels good because it's easy to cast a net and pull these people in. But that that is not the path forward if we want a long and healthy life as a church. The keys to this are going to be the working of the mind, good theology, good doctrine, teaching people how to study the Bible, knowing the importance between the Bible as a historical document and the Bible as a narrative document, you know? And so this is the way out, not appealing to the lowest common denominator.
Right. And, there remains always some sort of lowest common denominator. But that's the job of the pulpit, to not allow the lowest common denominator to dictate what Christianity is. It's this idea that, we have these people like Michael Brown here that wrote this book, who just seem to think that LGBT people are the absolute worst.
Right.
and that he probably believes that they are actual demons and are going to come for them in their sleep. They're going to make your children gay because that's, how that works. And, all these horrible, stupid things, but don't have relationships with anybody. It's like, if you don't know anybody who's gay, shut your mouth.
Yeah. Yep.
When you tell me, it's like, what are these people like? Oh, well, they're misotheists, right? Because you can't just say God haters. You have to say misotheist because it makes you sound more intelligent. Well, it doesn't, because you're a complete Nimrod. I mean, that's the truth here. You think that people are going to take away your Bibles when nobody said anything of the sort. I'm sorry, but I'm being completely ungenerous about this, but it pisses me off. It's like there are LGBT people who are desperately craving Christ.
Right.
I'm not saying that to sound like an evangelical, like they all want us to come and preach at them. No, like these are people that were trying to go to church who were kicked out.
Yeah.
You know, these are people who want that community but don't have it. It's like no matter what you think about the whole thing, you're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself, and we were told also that it means to love your enemy. And if these people are at the worst your enemy, your job is still to love them.
Right.
And you can't do that by calling them misotheists and putting words into their mouth and saying, well, you're just going to try to take my Bible away. When, you know what? Sometimes they're trying to actually get you to give them a Bible, just so
Yeah.
shut your face,
Yeah. Right.
If you if you find one of these folks on the side of the road, with their head split open, uh, are you going to stop and help them? Are you going to be like the priests and the teachers and Jesus's parable of the Good Samaritan that just kept walking by because, oh, I'm not going to touch that filthy jag. No, sorry.
Right. Yeah. What was I was listening to? I was listening to a talk on a different subject, but it got around to this idea of if you say you love somebody and your expectation is for them to change, that's not love. That's just a transactional experience. On the other hand,
Right.
if you have a relationship with somebody and you feel obligated, you feel that thing to change, that's probably closer to love. Like not expecting them to do the hard work, but you being so inspired by this relationship that you have that you're willing to do something to make that relationship better. That's love. And to me, that's the note I want to end on is we can choose to be more hospitable or less hospitable. We can choose to be more compassionate or less compassionate. We can choose to open our doors to a wider range of people, or we can choose to close them. We can choose to engage with the world without judging it, or we can choose to pull back from the world and back into white veils and dark ages. The choice is up to us. And we have the ability and the empowerment to make good choices.
Yeah, choose love, man. That's all there is to it. Choose love, and it's going to suck sometimes. Choose it anyway.
Exactly right. Well said. Let's see. Picks of the week. So if you like picks of the week, send us an email with your pick of the week at churcheslanepodcast@gmail.com, as well as other comments, critiques, questions, or recipes that you want to send. By all means, we want to hear it all. churcheslanepodcast@gmail.com. Mark, what is your pick of the week?
After all that stuff, I'm going to have to go with a YouTube channel I found recently, Maggie May Fish. May is MAE, but Maggie May Fish. I've watched a number of her videos. She's talking about different movies, and she addresses various issues. I watched one. I was talking about Stanley Kubrick versus David Lynch, which David Lynch is a weird guy, and I love him.
Yes.
So it was really interesting. Another one she had on RoboCop. One I saw in Rambo that I'm looking forward to watching next. I would recommend checking her out. She's got a really sharp wit, and I think a really piercing way of looking at movies.
Right. That's
So what
awesome.
about you?
Okay, so mine's going to be really practical for our audience. Um, go to your smartphone, go to your tablet, and go get the YouVersion app. Um, we live in a country with more versions and translations of the Bible than I could even count, and every Bible has a purpose. And in my opinion, none of these Bibles are quote unquote bad, right? But they have a purpose. So when somebody had the idea, let's have a Bible that really accommodates the mind and the thinking of a teenager, well, that spurs people to translate and think about the Bible differently, and you come up with the NIV. And then somebody has, well, if we did that, how can we make the Bible more accessible to the mind of a child, right? And then very smart people get together in a room and they come up with the Message version. But then something weird happens, and all of a sudden, in the middle of your adult sermon, the pastor starts teaching out of the Message version, and it's very nice and it's very quotable, but it may not be either technically accurate in terms of word for word accurate, or it may not be accurate from the point of view of just getting the context of the actual thought accurately. And so what's awesome about the YouVersion app, and there's several things that are awesome about it, but it's very easy to flip from whatever version the pastor is preaching from and just flip to a different version, whatever, version you like. I happen to like the NASB. A lot of people like the ESV. There's lots of different versions. Well, but you get to flip very quickly between different versions. And right there in the sermon, you can kind of go, oh, hey, this makes sense now. This makes more sense. This is something I should follow up on later in my own study time, right? And it's just an amazing app to help you contextualize the things that come out of the mind of the same person week after week after week after week that may have a bias. It might help you to reel that back in and experience the Bible for yourself.
Yeah, and as somebody who, graduated with their master's in exegesis, right? Like I feel like I need to comment briefly on that. Is, I've been asked more than once, hey, what's the best translation?
Mm.
And the answer is none and all of them. And
Right.
that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
Is that, the NASB is a great translation if you don't like the English language.
Right.
It's,
Oh, that hurts. That hurts.
the NIV is really good if you like the English language, but, also want it to be a little bit closer to kind of what's there. But the thing is that when it comes to these translations, there are ambiguities in the Greek and the Hebrew that don't come through in English. There are things that aren't ambiguous in those languages that are ambiguous in English. So always be flipping different translations just to see, because and YouVersion is a great app for doing that quickly, because that really can get you past some of the questions you might have about a text.
Right. And by the way, just parenthetically here, for those of you who are refuse technology and still prefer the feel of paper under your fingers, what you're looking for is what's called a parallel Bible. And a parallel Bible will put like 4 or 8 versions of the Bible all next to each other. So you can just easily go from version to version of the same piece of text.
Or if you're not a pervert, you can just put 8 Bibles in front of you.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, like people have space for that. Yeah. All
I've
right.
done it more than once.
I hear that. Yeah, that's a little too true. That hits a little too close to home there. So yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So if you like what you hear, We would love it if in your favorite podcast app you would leave a comment and rate us. And like we said before, anything you want to communicate to us, by all means, Church's Lane Podcast at gmail.com.
Okay, I think we can cut it there.
Oh, you're not going to end with a benediction today?
I thought you were going to use pre-recorded stuff.
Oh, I thought there was going to be a new benediction each week.
Oh,
But you want me to,
I wasn't thinking that. I can do that if we want.
you want to fly one in real quick?
I'll phone one in real quick. I'm just going to go with the classic. Is may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.
Great. That's great. And that's not even the whole article. We stopped at the first section of that article, of that
I
chapter.
know.
That's how nutty bananas that was.
That thing gets so weird.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna cut off the recordings real quick here. Hold on.
Oh yeah. Don't need to have like
Yeah,
a whole ton of extra time here.
Yep. So let's do that and then stop